Alright, a conference report. You had a great video there. What I first thought of when you said the time shape of the body, I thought of a tube, a physical, the body, and how it looks in four-dimensional space. Okay. But you talked about something else, which is our model of time and our time in terms of possibilities. One thing that's interesting about the reversibility of time combined with quantum mechanics, by the way, is that you might have possibilities in the past. Things that could have happened to lead you where you are now. For example, a different branch that would have taken you back to the same place, or even all the way back to your ancestors. You could have been from a different country, perhaps, and been right where you are now with the same accent and voice and everything. Of course, that would require this strange shift, parallel shift kind of thing. It's just an idea. But anyway, what I think you're talking about is the model. Now, I make my model adhere to this physical model, this material model. That was my first thought in a second, and I'll talk about that. But to me, it's a big gray area, a cone of grayness. It's not really a cone. The cone is in there somewhere, and it's more like a fractal structure. Now, I think a lot of those possibilities that we thought we had, we never had anyway. You were never going to... I mean, it's pretty easy to drive with the car through Paris if you really, really want to. Lots of young people do just hike there or whatever. You know, there's ways to get it together to do it. I've seen all kinds of people pull it off if you just work and put all your resources towards that. Do some seasonal job or something. So, those people were never going to do that because of some other reason. And so I see that my way too. So I'm finding out the fog is lifting. When I see a possibility that's gone, very rarely is it like I could have gone that way. I see why I didn't go that way. I still sometimes wish, wouldn't it have been nice to go that way? You know, but you might as well just wish for reincarnation if you're wanting to redo those things over. What you really learned is that you were in a state of mind. See, that's where there's not a free will. Because you had an inclination to choose something a certain way. In the past, there's no free will. So, you know, choices in the past were already determined. Okay, and I've suddenly become sort of like an anti-free will looking back in time. I think more in terms of there's different ways that could have led to where I am than there's different ways something different in the past could have led. There's probably both. But I'm pretty much in tune with being at this cone between possibilities that go out in both directions. I tend to think there are some possibilities that go away, but the possibilities get more dense. They probably do change in some sense, because since I believe in free will in the forward direction, it means you could make some decisions differently before they're done, with forethought. Okay, but what you really interested me was, I was thinking about this, your body, and often people think of it as a tube. In the four-dimensional, it's a tube. But really it's in the same space. Is it a tube if I'm standing in the same place? It should still be a kind of tube, because the space can overlap, right? It's time that separates it. It can be in the same space. But it's a tube because you move around. But by far, the main motion that you do is in a circle around the center of the Earth. Now, an interesting thing is Einstein tried to prove that relativity applied to rotational velocities. And all the math is very similar, which you use angular velocity, you know, and angular momentum and all the rest of it. But the funny thing is, you can't. It's not invariant. You can't. It isn't relativistic. When you are in a circle, going in a circle, spinning object or orbit is the same thing. Then you're going in a tube, in a spiral around the Earth and around the Sun, and neither of those motions is relativistic. Now, you can't tell the linear motion of the Sun relative to the other stars. That's relativistic. But relative to the Earth and the Sun and any other curvature and accelerations we feel from other bodies, there's you can tell how fast you're spinning. And there's tidal forces and all kinds of physical things happen. My explanation of why that is because it's a system of things, and there's relationships, and relationships exist. That's what relativity really means. So a spinning object enters into where there's a lot of relationships, and between all those relationships you can deduce the relations. If you look close enough with quantum mechanics, it becomes difficult to tell again. But if you look in the aggregate, when there's lots of relations, you can make really high accuracy predictions. So anyway, it's kind of an interesting thing because we're going in this non-relativistic spiral. Okay, and we know this stuff is affected by things like relativity. In the case of Mercury, it's why Mercury flips a weird number of times every time it goes around, and it's in this weird stable orbit that Newtonian-wise would not be stable, but relativistically it makes sense. So here we are going in this spiral tube, all of these times around, and I just found it interesting to realize, because I used to think of it more like this tube, or possibly where you walked around a tube and then it'd get real thick if you stayed still, like you're leaving a paint trail. But that's barely any of our motion. So interesting subject.